Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review The Revenge of Hobo Johnson by Hobo Johnson. This is the third full-length album of one of the most unique and eccentric artists in recent memory, Hobo Johnson. A release that I was actually kinda excited to listen to, or I was at least curious to see in which directions it was going to go. Hobo Johnson is a pretty bizarre case for me, as the very first album he did, The Rise of Hobo Johnson, was certainly a pretty unique album in what it does. I don't really believe I've heard anything like this before, but it was one of those cases where the album was unique but not in a good way. For me, the very first Hobo Johnson album was almost insufferable, and I don't have anything against Hobo Johnson as a person, because I know that for a lot of people who really hated this album made all of those assumptions that this is music for incels, which is something that I don't really see being the case, and I understand that there was an attempt and that he tried to present something unique and different, but it didn't work for me at all. It was an album that I couldn't really stand. It was an album that I didn't like whatsoever. But I was still believing in Hobo Johnson. I believed that he could potentially make a great album, and that was the case with the second album, The Fall of Hobo Johnson, an album that not only did it caught me off guard, it was an album that had pretty much anything I wanted from a Hobo Johnson album and much more. Not only it was an extremely eccentric album, it was really diverse, it was charming at points, and it really presented many different elements, it took many risks, and in many occasions it actually worked, and made for possibly the biggest difference in between albums ever for me. And this album has actually become even a bigger grower from time to time. Like, if you see my initial review on this album back when it was released, do not really take that review into consideration anymore. My opinions on this album have changed for the better. I prefer it even more now. So this led to me actually being excited for the next Hobo Johnson release, and I was looking forward to it, and I was curious in what directions it was going to go. I was not necessarily expecting something similar with The Fall of Hobo Johnson, but I was at least expecting something unique, something different, and something kinda eccentric. And then the very first single out of this album is released, I Want to See the World, and I got extremely worried after listening to this, because this was not even close to what I wanted to listen to. This track was a major disappointment, and there were so many countries included in this song, and Greece was nowhere to be found. How dare you? In all seriousness though, this track was slightly painful to sit through. I actually didn't like this track whatsoever, and it got me worried because it somewhat gave me vibes from the very first album, which was completely obnoxious. It has some really simple chord progressions, the beat is trash, the delivery becomes quickly annoying, and the lyrics, oh, those lyrics. Now, the thing is that I obviously do not believe there are bad intentions behind this. This could have been executed and written way better. There have been occasions with better writing and better lyricism. This just feels off. Fortunately, the album somewhat redeems itself with the very next single, I Want You Back, a track that I would actually consider to be the greatest moment in this album and one of the greatest Hobo Johnson tracks. This one kinda gave me some vibes from the second album. It is quite energetic, it has a charm to it, it has many great elements, especially towards the second half where you have the bass and it becomes more aggressive, and it has elements that I like from the sound of Hobo Johnson. It is another track that feels quite simple with its melodies, but in what it does, it actually sounds pretty good, and even in its lyricism, this one sounds pretty okay and well done. And then there was the third single, You Want a Baby, which this one was just a pretty simple guitar ballad that just felt like a pretty standard folk song, and there was nothing really that special about it. I personally found it to be a pretty boring and uninteresting song. And so from the first three singles, I didn't really know what to make out of it so far, but I listened to this whole album and I'm left with mixed feelings. This one is another pretty short album, by the way. It's only 10 tracks and it goes for 32 minutes. There is not that much material in this album. The issue is that in many occasions you have many tracks that sound really similar one from each other. And this is the biggest issue I actually ended up having with this album, is that it doesn't really have variety to it. This feels really empty in comparison, and it's also a pretty safe album. In many occasions you have just some pretty standard folk, or in this case anti-folk songs that don't really have that much to them. You have some pretty standard chord progressions, some quite simple and standard beats, and the only thing that somewhat feels unique is just the delivery of Hobo Johnson. Other than that, in terms of instrumentation, it's not really that abstract, there's nothing unique about this album, and it feels really disconnected because other than the delivery, this doesn't really feel like a Hobo Johnson album. Even the very first album actually was unique. I didn't really like it, but I could admit it was unique. On the other hand, I prefer the very safe approach of the third album rather the failed experiment that was the first, but when you have such a unique and diverse and well executed album like the second one, you obviously expect more and not a step down, and so I was just left with mixed impressions with this album. I don't really know how to feel about it. For the most part, the rest of the album, with most of the tracks, feels pretty average. Like tracks like Anton LaVey and Jordan's House and Prequel to Animal Farm, they just sound like pretty basic anti-folk songs with not that much to them. Out of those sort of similar tracks, My Therapist was possibly the one where I actually kinda like the beat, and it has a bit of a charm to it, and it's one of those occasions where I actually like its lyricism. I think that it's pretty well done in that regard. There is also the track You Need Help that also feels quite charming, but it's just more of the same. The album somewhat tries to present something a bit different with the final two moments. There's the track Song 9, The Government's Not Great, which in my opinion it's the second best moment of the album because it gave me vibes of the previous project. I like that lyrically it pretty much has the themes and the lyricism from all of the previous songs in the album, and I like that it's one of those songs that starts pretty smooth, but when it comes to the chorus it's extremely explosive, really loud and absolutely intense. There is an intensity with the vocals, with the delivery, there is such passion, and I really like it when Hobo Johnson goes to these directions. In my opinion it makes for some of the greatest occasions, and so I really ended up enjoying this particular track. And finally we have the outro, which is basically a narrator thanking you for listening to the new album, and there is also a collage with parody portions here and there. The result in my opinion ends up being unfunny and obnoxious and one of my least favorite moments. Once again though, I can tell that there was an attempt. It doesn't just feel like a filler song that it didn't need to be here. There was actually work put through this. There were some moments that you could say were clever and that took a bit of a thought. Other than that though, this is not a track that I enjoyed. And this basically makes the most special moments in the album to be some of my favorites and also some of my least favorite moments out of this whole project. But all of those tracks were not even unique in Hobo Johnson standards. They were pretty standard stuff that we've heard similar material like this, and the rest of the album is pretty much just really simple, generic, boring and unimaginative folk. And this is not what I wanted from a Hobo Johnson album. The results could have definitely been worse, that's for sure, but I still had more expectations. In my opinion, Hobo Johnson has potential for more. He can make some pretty unique material, stuff that I haven't heard before, stuff that would keep me excited, an abstract feel and an abstract delivery that it's not really easy to find, especially being presented with instrumentation like this. But this was pretty safe, and if there is going to be another Hobo Johnson project in the future, I'm expecting more. I'm going to give The Revenge of Hobo Johnson a 5 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.